The red wine spreading across the snow-white linen should have been just another mess for the staff to scrub away in silence. Another tantrum from the daughter of a man who ruled Seoul's shadows with an iron fist. But when Maya Richardson didn't look away, when she didn't tremble like the dozen tutors who had fled before her, Han Jae-kwon felt a strange, jarring shift in the atmosphere of the room. He had seen generals beg for their lives with more dignity than he saw in the panicked guests around them, yet this waitress stood like a pillar of salt in the center of the storm. "That's a vintage Cabernet, young lady." Maya's voice was smooth, devoid of the terror that usually fed Ji-woo's fire. Jae-kwon's eyes narrowed, his hands, usually quick to signal a death sentence, remained frozen on the table. He watched the way Maya's calm gaze met the child's defiant one, not with anger, but with a quiet authority that seemed to slice through the girl's unchecked power. For the first time in his life of absolute control, Jae-kwon found himself a spectator in his own kingdom. "Clean it up," Ji-woo hissed, her small hand still gripping the glass. Maya didn't move. "No," she whispered, and in that single syllable, Jae-kwon's world tilted on its axis. Maya had served tables at the Onyx for 3 years by perfecting the art of the ghost. To the elite who dined there, she was a vessel for wine, a silent mover of porcelain, a shadow in a tailored black vest. She knew the rules of the invisible. Keep your back straight, your eyes down, and your presence weightless. She understood that in a world of gold and blood, being noticed was a liability. She was a black woman in a city of rigid glass ceilings, and her survival depended on her professional mask never slipping. Today, that mask was all she had left. Her daughter's tuition was 3 months behind, and the letter from the immigration office sat like a lead weight in her pocket. She couldn't afford a scene. She couldn't afford to be human. She had spent a lifetime learning how to absorb the disrespect of the powerful without letting it touch her soul. But as she looked at the lonely, destructive girl at table 12 and the cold, distant man sitting across from her, Maya realized some stains couldn't be ignored. The rent was overdue, her feet ached from a 12-hour shift, and the stakes of losing this job were catastrophic. But as Maya stepped toward the most dangerous man in Korea, she decided she was tired of being a ghost. The silence that followed the spill was heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above table 12. At the Onyx, a spilled drink was a crisis. A deliberate act of vandalism by the daughter of Han Jae-kwon was a catastrophe. The surrounding diners had turned into statues, their forks suspended in mid-air, their breath held in collective terror. They weren't looking at the red wine soaking into the heirloom lace. They were looking at the man in the dark suit, waiting for the explosion that would surely follow. Jae-kwon didn't move. His hands remained clasped on the table, his knuckles white against his tanned skin. His expression was a mask of cold, controlled fury, but his eyes were fixed on Ji-woo with a look of profound exhaustion. He was a man who could command armies of soldiers, yet he was being held hostage by a 7-year-old in a velvet dress. Ji-woo stared back, her chin tilted at a sharp, defiant angle. She was waiting for the shout, the lecture, or the standard dismissal to a waiting car, anything that would acknowledge the fire burning inside her. Maya stepped into the center of the standoff. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble for a cloth or offer the frantic apologies the floor manager was likely preparing in the wings. Instead, she moved with the measured grace of someone who had spent her life navigating rooms where she wasn't supposed to take up space. She stopped inches from the table, her shadow falling over the widening crimson stain. She didn't look at Jae-kwon. She looked directly at Ji-woo. "That's a very bold choice for a Tuesday night," Maya said, her voice a calm, low melody that cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Ji-woo blinked, the script of her rebellion suddenly interrupted. "It's a mess," the girl hissed, shoving the empty glass further into the wet fabric. "Clean it." Maya didn't flinch. She folded her hands behind her back, maintaining a posture of effortless dignity. "I could clean it, Ji-woo. That is my job. But your father didn't bring you here to watch me work. He brought you here to have dinner with him." Jae-kwon's head turned slowly, his gaze shifting from his daughter to the woman in the black vest. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as if he were seeing a ghost suddenly take flesh and bone. He wasn't used to people using his daughter's name without a stutter. "She is being difficult," Jae-kwon said, his voice a low rumble of thunder. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. She's being heard, Mr. Han, Maya replied, finally meeting his dark, dangerous eyes. There's a difference. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a clean, white linen napkin. She didn't drape it over the mess. Instead, she placed it firmly in Ji-woo's small, wine-stained hand. The first step to making a statement, Maya whispered to the girl, is being willing to stay and face what you've done. If you want to stay, we blot the stain together. If you want to leave, the mess stays, and so does the memory of a night wasted. For a heartbeat, the world hung in the balance. Then, slowly, Ji-woo pressed the napkin into the wine. Across the table, Jae-kwon watched Maya with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. The ghost had vanished, and in her place stood the only person in Seoul who wasn't afraid of his name. The following 3 days were a blur of jittery nerves and forced normalcy. Maya had expected a phone call from her manager or a visit from the police. Instead, she received nothing but a heavy, echoing silence. She told herself that men like Han Jae-kwon didn't have time for waitresses who overstepped. He had likely forgotten her the moment the valet pulled his black sedan away from the Onyx. That delusion shattered on Friday night. Maya was walking home from the subway, the damp Seoul air clinging to her skin, when the streetlights seemed to dim. A long, charcoal-colored car sat idling at the curb near her apartment, a sleek, predatory shape that didn't belong in this neighborhood of crumbling brick and tangled power lines. The rear window rolled down with a mechanical hum, revealing the sharp, silhouette profile of the man from table 12. "Get in, Ms. Richardson," Jae-kwon said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. Maya's pulse hammered against her ribs, but she didn't run. She remembered the weight of the immigration letter in her pocket and the empty cupboards waiting for her upstairs. She opened the door and slid onto the cool leather seat. The interior smelled of expensive cedar and the same dangerous gravity that followed him everywhere. "I've fired 6 nannies in 4 months, Jae-kwon began, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. He didn't look at her. He watched the rain-slicked streets of the city passing by. 3 were former educators. 2 were child psychologists. 1 was a distant cousin who thought she could discipline Ji-woo with fear. They all failed because they were looking at my name, not my daughter." He turned then, his dark eyes searching Maya's face with a clinical, unsettling intensity. "At the restaurant, you didn't look at my name. You didn't even look at me until you were done with her. You gave her a choice. No one gives a child like Ji-woo a choice. She's a child, Mr. Han. Not a tactical problem to be solved," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "In my world, everything is a tactical problem," he countered. He reached into his suit jacket and produced an envelope, sliding it across the armrest. "Inside is a contract for 3 months. The salary is 4 times what you make at the restaurant. You will live at the estate. You will have Ji-woo's full attention from sunrise to sunset." Maya looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "And if I can't fix her? If she pours wine on your life every day?" A ghost of a smile touched Jae-kwon's lips, a cold, fleeting thing. "She's already doing that. I'm not hiring you to make her polite, Maya. I'm hiring you because you're the only person she's actually listened to since her mother died. My world is full of people who say yes to me. I need someone who knows when to say no to her." He leaned closer, the scent of bergamot and power suddenly overwhelming. "Bring her back from the edge, and I will ensure your status in this country is never questioned again. Fail and you simply go back to being a ghost. Do we have an agreement?" Maya looked out the window at her modest apartment building, then back at the man who held her future in his hands. She reached out and took the envelope. "I start tomorrow." The gates of the Han estate didn't just swing open. They parted like the jaws of a sleeping predator. As the car wound up the manicured driveway of the Songbuk-dong mansion, Maya felt the ghost within her trying to retreat, but she held her back. This wasn't a restaurant where she could disappear into the kitchen. This was a fortress of glass, black marble, and silence so thick it felt like a physical weight. Inside, the air was filtered and cold, smelling of beeswax and expensive isolation. Jae-kwon led her through a foyer that could have housed a museum before stopping at the base of a floating staircase. He didn't offer a tour. He simply looked up toward the 2nd floor, where a small figure stood shadowed by the railing. She's waiting for you, Jaquan said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous rumble. The last one didn't make it past the first hour. I have a meeting in the city. My security detail is at the perimeter if you need them. I won't, Maya said, her eyes already fixed on the child above. As Jaquan departed, his footsteps echoing like a countdown, Maya climbed the stairs. She found Jiwoo sitting in the center of a playroom that looked more like a high-end toy store than a child's sanctuary. The girl was dressed in silk, her hair perfectly braided, but her eyes were twin flint stones. On the floor between them lay a shattered porcelain vase, its remains scattered across a hand-woven rug. I broke it, Jiwoo said, her voice flat and challenging. She didn't look at the mess. She looked at Maya's reaction. It cost more than your life. My father will be very angry when I tell him you dropped it. Maya didn't gasp. She didn't scold. She walked over to a nearby chair, smoothed her skirt, and sat down, crossing her legs with the same composure she'd held at the restaurant. It's a beautiful shade of blue, Maya remarked, gesturing to the shards. But if you're going to use your father's name as a shield, Jiwoo, you should pick something harder to fix than a vase. Fear is a boring way to make friends. Jiwoo's mask slipped, just for a fraction of a second. Surprise flickered in her gaze before being replaced by a sneer. You're just a servant. You're supposed to be afraid. Everyone else is. Don't you know who he is? I know exactly who he is, Maya replied, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But he's not the one standing in this room right now. You are. And right now, you look like a girl who's tired of breaking things just to see if anyone cares enough to stop her. Jiwoo stood up, her small hands balled into fists. I can have you thrown out. I can tell him you hit me. He'll believe me. He always believes me because I'm all he has left. Then go ahead, Maya said, gesturing toward the door. Tell him the lie. Go back to being the girl in the golden cage with no one to talk to but the guards. Or you can help me pick up the pieces, and we can talk about why you're so determined to be the villain in your own story. For a long minute, the only sound was the hum of the central air. Then, with a frustrated huff, Jiwoo kicked a shard of porcelain. She didn't call for the guards. Instead, she sat down on the floor, the first crack appearing in the wall she'd built around her heart. The following weeks were a war of attrition fought with silence and small, deliberate gestures. The tutors had tried to conquer Jiwoo with math drills and rigid etiquette. Maya chose the sun-drenched sunroom and the soil. She brought in vibrant hibiscus and sturdy magnolias, plants that felt like a breath of her own history, and set them among the manicured orchids of the Han estate. Jiwoo watched from the doorway for 3 days, her arms crossed, her expression a mimicry of her father's cold detachment. On the 4th day, Maya didn't ask her to help. She simply began to tell a story while she pruned. She spoke of her grandmother's garden in Georgia, a place where the dirt was red and the heat felt like a warm hug. She spoke of how every flower had a name and a secret, and how some plants only bloomed when they felt safe enough to stop hiding behind their thorns. My father says gardens are for people who have too much time, Jiwoo said, finally stepping into the room. Her voice was less like a weapon today and more like a question. Your father knows how to build walls, Jiwoo. But gardens are how you build a home, Maya replied, not looking up from a stubborn root. She held out a small trowel. In my culture, we say that if you talk to the plants, they'll tell you what they need. Some need more light. Some need to be left alone. And some, she paused, looking at the girl, just need to know they won't be pulled up by the roots the moment they start to grow. Jiwoo hesitated, then knelt in the dirt, her expensive silk leggings forgotten. She took the trowel with a grip that was surprisingly tentative. As they worked, the rigid hierarchy of the house began to dissolve. Maya didn't teach from a book. She taught through the rhythm of the earth. She shared the soul of her heritage. Stories of resilience, of beauty found in unexpected places, and the strength it took to remain soft in a world that demanded you be hard. For the first time, Jiwoo wasn't a Mafia princess, or a problem to be solved. She was just a child listening to the legend of the desert rose. She began to ask questions, not about power or her father's business, but about the world Maya came from. She wanted to know about the food that smelled like cinnamon and the music that made your heart beat faster. In the doorway, unseen by either of them, Jaquan stood in the shadows. He watched his daughter's dirt-streaked face break into a genuine, fleeting smile. He saw the way Maya moved, unhurried, grounded, and utterly unafraid of the mess. He realized then that Maya wasn't just teaching his daughter a hobby. She was giving her a language that he had long ago forgotten how to speak. The ghost he had hired was starting to fill his house with a light that made the gold in his halls look dim. The heavy, formal dining room was usually a place of silence, where the clink of silverware sounded like a gavel and the shadows in the corners felt like bodyguards. But tonight the air was different. There were no white-gloved servers or French-inspired menus. Instead, the long mahogany table was occupied by a small, colorful array of dishes Maya had prepared herself, dishes that smelled of cayenne, garlic, and home. Jaquan sat at the head of the table, his suit jacket discarded for the first time, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He watched as Jiwoo eagerly reached for a piece of cornbread, her hands no longer trembling with the need to destroy, but reaching with the desire to partake. "You've changed the menu," Jaquan observed, his voice less like a command and more like a curious question. He picked up a fork, eyeing the soul food with a mixture of suspicion and intrigue. "I thought the house needed a break from things that are appropriate," Maya replied, setting a pitcher of sweet tea down. She didn't retreat to the kitchen. Instead, she took the seat next to Jiwoo, a move that would have caused the previous nannies to faint from breach of protocol. Jaquan paused, his fork hovering. In his world, seats were earned through blood and loyalty, or assigned by rank. No one simply sat. "Ms. Richardson, the staff usually dines in the quarters." Maya met his gaze, her eyes steady and warm, yet unyielding. "Tonight, I'm not the staff, Mr. Han. I'm the person who spent 4 hours teaching your daughter that she doesn't have to be lonely to be powerful. And she wants me here. Don't you, Jiwoo?" The young girl nodded vigorously, her mouth full of food, her eyes darting between her father and the woman who had become her anchor. A tense silence stretched between the two adults. Jaquan was a man who decided the fate of shipping lanes and rival syndicates. He was a man who had never been told no in his own home. He looked at Maya, really looked at her, and saw the ghost had been replaced by a woman of substance, a woman who didn't fear his shadow because she carried her own light. "It's my house," he said softly, a final half-hearted attempt to assert the only type of control he knew. "And it's her childhood," Maya countered gently. "You can have a house full of people who obey you, or you can have dinner with people who actually know you. Choose one." Jaquan looked down at the vibrant food, then back at Maya. Slowly, the tension left his shoulders. He didn't call for security. He didn't remind her of her contract. Instead, he took a bite of the meal she had prepared, the spice a sharp, welcome contrast to the blandness of his isolated life. "The cornbread," he admitted, his voice low and private, "is excellent." In that moment, the power dynamic that had defined their relationship Desdi the restaurant shattered. He wasn't the boss, and she wasn't the help. They were two parents trying to bridge a gap, and for the first time in 15 years, Jaquan felt like he didn't have to be the most dangerous man in the room to be respected. The transformation of the Han estate hadn't gone unnoticed by the world outside its gates. In the shadows of Seoul's underworld, a boss who was trading his coldness for a waitress's warmth was a boss who was growing weak. The afternoon at the National Museum started with laughter, a sound still new and fragile for Jiwoo. She was running ahead, pointing at ancient pottery with fingers that were no longer stained with wine, but with the charcoal from the sketches Maya had taught her to draw. Maya followed, her eyes scanning the crowd with a residue of her old ghost alertness, while two of Jaquan's men trailed at a discreet distance. The shift in the air was instantaneous. It wasn't a sound, but a sudden, unnatural parting of the crowd near the museum's north exit. Maya saw the glint of steel before she saw the man, a shadow moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with art. "Jiwoo, come here," Maya said, her voice dropping into that low, urgent register. The girl hesitated, her hand outstretched toward a display. In that heartbeat of hesitation, the first shot shattered a nearby glass casing. The sound was deafening, a crack of thunder that sent the tourists into a screaming frenzy. Jaquan's guards moved, but they were seconds too far. Maya didn't think about the immigration letter, the unpaid tuition, or the contract in the envelope. She moved with a ferocity that would have shocked the diners at the Onyx. She lunged forward, catching Ji-woo by the waist and pulling her small body beneath her own just as a second bullet hissed through the space where the girl had stood. They hit the marble floor hard. Maya curled herself into a human shield, tucking Ji-woo's head into the crook of her neck, shielding the child's vitals with her own back. "Stay down," Maya whispered, her voice a jagged rasp against the girl's ear. "Don't look up. Just keep breathing." Shouts erupted as the guards engaged the attacker, the museum turning into a battlefield of echoes and shattering glass. Maya felt the sting of a graze along her shoulder, a hot, searing line of fire, but she didn't move. She held the girl tighter, her heartbeat a frantic, rhythmic drum against Ji-woo's back. When the silence finally returned, heavy and acrid with the smell of gunpowder, the first thing Maya heard wasn't the police or the guards. It was the frantic, heavy footfalls of a man who sounded like he was losing his soul. Jaekwon skidded across the marble, his face a mask of primal terror. He ignored his men and the captured shooter, falling to his knees beside the two women on the floor. "Maya!" he gasped, his hands trembling as he reached for them. Maya slowly uncurled, her face pale and streaked with dust, but her eyes were fierce as she checked Ji-woo for injuries. "She's safe," Maya managed, her voice trembling. "She's okay." Jaekwon pulled them both into his arms, his expensive suit staining with the blood from Maya's shoulder. In that moment, the armor he had worn for 15 years didn't just crack, it shattered completely. He wasn't the boss of Seoul. He was a man who had almost lost the only two people who made him feel alive. "I've got you," he whispered into Maya's hair, his voice breaking. "I've got you both." The aftermath of the museum attack left the Han estate feeling less like a fortress and more like a tomb. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic from Maya's bandaged shoulder and the suffocating tension of a man preparing for war. In the downstairs study, the monitors flickered with the faces of Jaekwon's lieutenants, their voices distorted by encryption, all demanding the same thing, a reckoning. They wanted blood for the insult. They wanted a display of power that would turn the Han River red. Jaekwon stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the city lights. His jaw was set, his hands clenched behind his back. The old Jaekwon, the one who lived by the code of the shadows, already had the targets marked. He knew exactly whose life would pay for the graze on Maya's skin and the terror in his daughter's eyes. A soft knock interrupted the darkness. Maya stepped into the room, her arm in a sling, her expression weary but resolute. Behind her, Ji-woo hovered, clutching the sketchpad Maya had given her as if it were a shield. "The cars are being prepped," Maya said quietly. It wasn't a question. She had seen the black SUVs idling in the driveway, the heavy weaponry being loaded by silent men in tactical gear. Jaekwon didn't turn around. "They tried to take everything from me, Maya. If I don't answer this, they will come back. And next time I might not be fast enough." Maya walked toward him, her footsteps steady despite the trauma of the afternoon. She stopped when she was inches away, forcing him to look at her, not as a subordinate but as his equal. "If you go out those gates tonight to kill, you aren't protecting us. You're just making sure we never stop looking over our shoulders. You're teaching Ji-woo that the only way to survive is to be the monster." "I am a king in this city," Jaekwon hissed, the shadow of the Mafia boss flickering in his eyes. "Kings don't walk away." "Then be a father," Maya countered, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than his roar. "A king fights for territory. Father fights for a future. If you spill more blood, the cycle never ends. Ji-woo will never be safe. I will never be truly seen. We will just be casualties of your throne." Jaekwon looked past Maya to his daughter. Ji-woo was watching him, her eyes wide with a silent plea. She wasn't looking for a conqueror. She was looking for the man who had sat at the table and eaten cornbread with her. The silence stretched, agonizing and heavy. Slowly, Jaekwon reached for the desk phone. He dialed his lead captain. Maya held her breath, expecting the order for execution. "Stand down," Jaekwon commanded, his voice shaking with the effort of the words. "Burn the files. Liquidate the holdings. We're moving the assets to the legitimate sectors. If anyone has a problem with the transition, tell them I am dead. To the underworld, Han Jaekwon died at the museum today." He hung up and turned to Maya, his face lined with the immense weight of his choice. He had given up an empire, but as he reached out to take Maya's hand, he looked like a man who had finally found a kingdom worth keeping. The transition from the underworld to the light was not a quiet affair. It was a structural dismantling that left the estate feeling raw and exposed. For Maya, the shifting tides brought a new, gnawing insecurity. As the guards were replaced by corporate security and the black SUVs by modest sedans, she found herself standing in the middle of the grand foyer, watching the life she had built for Jiwoo become the foundation of a new reality. The 3-month contract in the envelope was long expired, and the Nanny title felt like a thin, fraying thread. She was packing her bag in the sunroom, her movements stiff with the professional discipline she had once used at the restaurant, when Jae-kwon appeared. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple sweater, looking less like a king and more like a man who had finally found peace. "The car is ready to take Jiwoo to her new school," he said, watching her carefully. "But you're packing the wrong things, Maya." Maya didn't look up. She kept her eyes on a small pot of hibiscus. "The contract is over, Jae-kwon. Jiwoo is happy, is safe. You've done what you promised. You don't need a nanny anymore, and I don't want to be a ghost in another man's house, waiting for the day I'm no longer useful. Is that what you think you are?" Jae-kwon's voice was low, vibrating with a frustration that had nothing to do with power. He stepped into her space, his presence no longer a shadow but a warmth. "You think you're just a line item in a budget. A service I hired to fix a broken child." Maya finally turned, her eyes bright with the fear she had carried since the restaurant, the fear of being overlooked once the crisis was managed. "I am a waitress from Georgia who stepped into a war. I'm a woman who knows how to be invisible so she doesn't get hurt. I can't just stay here as a guest in your shadow." Jae-kwon reached out, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness that made the air between them still. "I didn't give up my empire to keep you as a servant, Maya. I gave it up because I realized I was ruling a kingdom of ghosts, and you were the only real thing in it." He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out a contract or a check. He pulled out a small velvet box and a set of keys to a storefront in the city, a space she had once mentioned would be perfect for a community garden and cafe. "I don't want a nanny," he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "I want the woman who told me no when the rest of the world said yes. I want the woman who saw my daughter when I was blind. You aren't invisible to me, Maya. You are the only person I truly see." Maya's breath hitched. The fear of being just a nanny evaporated, replaced by the weight of the keys in her hand and the look in his eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding behind a mask of professional restraint. She was standing in the center of her own life, finally undeniably seen. The seasons in Seoul had turned many times, but the garden at the heart of the Han estate remained a vibrant, living testament to the day a ghost decided to speak. The hibiscus and magnolias Maya had planted years ago were now towering and lush, their scent mingling with the crisp air of a life lived in the light. On the wide stone terrace, Maya stood leaning against the railing, a glass of sweet tea in her hand, a small, stubborn piece of her heritage that she had never let go. She watched the courtyard below, where a young woman with a sharp suit and an even sharper mind was directing a team of architects. Jiwoo was 24 now, her hair pulled back in a sleek, professional bun, her movements possessing all of her father's grace but none of his old, cold violence. She was overseeing the groundbreaking for the family's newest venture, a sustainable urban development project that would bring green spaces to the city's densest neighborhoods. "She has your eyes when she's focused," a low voice rumbled behind her. Maya felt the familiar warmth of Jae-kwon as he stepped up beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. The silver at his temples only added to the quiet dignity he had found since leaving the shadows. He no longer smelled of bergamot and danger. He smelled of cedarwood and the peace of a man who slept soundly at night. "She has your determination," Maya corrected with a smile, leaning into him. "But she has her own heart. She doesn't lead with fear, Jae-kwon. She leads with the vision we gave her." They watched as Jiwoo laughed at something one of the engineers said, a sound that was full and free. The golden cage had long since been dismantled, replaced by a legacy built on the foundation of being truly seen. The Han name, once whispered in the dark with terror, was now spoken in the sun with respect. Jaquan